What is the thing that no one gets, no one really understands anymore about class and how it's portrayed in this play? Let's find out. Hi there, I'm Giles Goff. I'm an education writer and a recovering English teacher. And today we're going to be looking at the theme of class, in particular how it applies to an inspector calls. Let's get into it. So a little bit of context about the British class system. Britain has a long history of a very established class rigidity. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, basically, if you were born poor, you're very likely to die poor as well. There was very little in the way of social mobility. Rags to riches was not much of a thing, and relationships across the class divide were heavily frowned upon. You could argue that we still have that to this day, that relationships across massive class divides are difficult, but at this point it would have been damn near impossible. And it's interesting that Mrs. Birling talks about this when she says, "I don't think we want to hear any details of this disgusting affair." Now, what's interesting is it a disgusting affair because he's having a relationship with a woman outside of marriage? Or is it that he's having a relationship with a woman who is so much lower class than him? She doesn't make that particularly clear, and that's coming through in Mrs. Birling there. Class fuels the entire play here. The whole story relies on class, because Eva is exploited because of a gender, but it's her class that makes her such an easy target. If she was of the same class, if she was upper middle class or anything like that, they wouldn't be able to treat her in the same way because she'd have people advocating for her. There would be people in her family or people in society that would be telling the Birlings that the way they were treating her wasn't acceptable. Now, the big idea, the thing I want to talk to you about today is the age of deference. So you submit to somebody who is in authority to you. You defer to them. Now, the age of deference refers to the idea of a time when those in society who were subordinate would be respectful of those above them, to respect your betters, if you like. This meant that those in power were not held accountable in the way they are today. And this is why the Birlings find it very strange, not just that they would be mixed up in Eva's death, but the way anybody would even suspect them, the way anybody would even bring it up. They find any level of accountability really uncomfortable for them. One thing I was thinking about was, when did the age of deference end? What put an end to it? And arguably, you could say the Profumo affair was the thing that really put an end to the age of deference. In 1963, John Profumo was the Secretary of State for War. He was a middle-aged man who admitted in the House of Commons that he had lied to his wife, his cabinet colleagues, and the nation about having an affair with a 19-year-old model called Christine Keeler, who was also having an affair with a Soviet naval attaché. So if he's having an affair with her, he could be telling her state secrets. She could then be telling those state secrets to the Soviets, to effectively what we think of as the Russians today. It's not quite, but it's close enough. So this is often cited as the beginning of the end of the age of deference. From this point on, it's not necessarily believed that those in the upper classes always have your best interest at heart, or they always know best. This shows how fallible they are, and this is the world that we live in. We don't just take for granted what our ministers or our prime ministers or our princes say. We question it. We sort of hold them to account. And that's one of the things that modern audiences might struggle with this. Just how controversial it is having an inspector actually hold a family like this to account. Now, what class are the Birlings? I think this sometimes is something that gets lost, and I wanted to talk about it. Mr. Birling is a successful factory owner, which means his family would be categorised as upper middle class. So that means they're well off, but they're not super rich aristocracy like Gerald's family. They don't have like a family title that's gone back generations or anything like that. Their house is a fairly large suburban house, so it's comfortable, but it's not a mansion. And to be honest with you, I think the 2015 version with David Thewlis does a bit of a disservice there, because it shows the house to be absolutely massive. Now, why did Priestley pick these people specifically? Well, I have a feeling that Priestley might have picked these type of people, upper middle class, because if he made them richer, audiences could dismiss the play's message as being only for the aristocracy, that the lords and the ladies are out of touch. And that's true, but the people who are quote-unquote working people were also out of touch as well. So those people, not even that much further down the social ladder than them, having a really hard time. And if you make it as a focus on the gentry or the aristocracy, then it's easier to say, oh, that's nothing to do with us. In the same way that he could have set the play in London or something like that, but by putting it in Brumley, it makes it about something we all have to pay attention to. We can't just say, oh, that only affects those people. Now, Mr. Birling, I want to show you the way he uses or weaponizes his class in this. He tries to intimidate the inspector into leaving or to only asking softball questions. When he says, perhaps I ought to warn you that Colonel Roberts is an old friend of mine, and I see him fairly frequently. We play golf together sometimes up at the West Brumley. Now, golf as a quote-unquote sport is quite a class-based one, because you can't just turn up and start swinging a golf club around like you might be able to do with turning up at a park and start kicking a football around. Being interested in golf involves being in a golf club, which is usually quite expensive, and therefore there's a class aspect to this. And what he's trying to tell the inspector is, I play golf with your boss, and if I say something about you that he doesn't like, you might lose your job. That's the implication there. Mrs. Birling is the most class-conscious of them all. She's described as her husband's social superior earlier, and we have talked about this previously. But because she's higher up in the class system, she has more to lose if that class system gets questioned. When she says, Arthur, you're not supposed to say such things, after he says, oh, excellent meal, tell cook for me, the idea was, in front of guests, you were meant to treat the servants like they weren't there, like they didn't exist. You were meant to compliment the hostess, e.g. the lady of the house, for the meal, even though she didn't cook it, but she would have chosen or approved it. You were meant to thank her for her choices. So this reinforced the idea that not only are those in the lower classes meant to be invisible, they're also meant to get absolutely no credit for their work whatsoever. So what do you think about representations of class in this play? Is there anything I missed? Anything I got wrong? Let's talk about it in the comments.
I hope that has proved useful and that's given you something for your essays. Please click like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.